So as soon as you click this video, I can assume that you're about to participate in a Bushiroad Springfest online tournament. And in order to help you prepare for that tournament as best as possible, I got some tips and tricks to help you not only prepare, but also perform better on the tournament day itself. So let's jump straight into it.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hacker Fighters, with the premium tournament finished, we're now in the middle of Bushiroad Springfest online. And with Overdress on the horizon means that a lot of new players are about to embark on their very first regional tournament. And for those players, I got a couple of handy, neat little tricks and tips to help them prepare for the tournament, as well as on the day of the tournament itself. But it doesn't exclude my veteran viewers, because even if you went to a previous regional, this is an online version, and that will bring a whole new set of challenges with it that you might not be prepared for or don't know what you could expect. So even if you are a newbie or a veteran player, some of these tips and tricks will help you to perform better on the tournament itself, or just make sure that nothing unexpected will happen. And in this video I have 7 neat little tips and tricks to help you prepare for said tournament, be it V Standard or Overdress, because it doesn't really matter what type of format you're gonna play, these tips and tricks will apply for each and every single one. So for number 7, we've got a very obvious basic one, but believe me, it's a very important one. Be prepared. And what I mean with this is basically have all the stuff that you need to be able to play your deck. Have your playmat, have your deck sleeve, have your dices, have your counters, have your tokens if you're gonna need them, and also have the correct deck that you filled in your form. You don't want to be a player that made it to top 8 but then be DQ'd because you put the wrong cards on your deck list that you're actually playing. I've seen this happen before. Also make sure that you have enough sleep and that you wake up on time, because you don't want to oversleep the tournament. Again, you don't want to be that guy. I've seen this happen before. And finally, because this is an online tournament setting, you have to have a remote setup. Test your remote setup, make sure that it works and it works properly, and also make sure that you can comfortably use your setup with the way that you're going to play the game. If you don't know how to set up a correct or a nice setup for a remote fight, you can check out this video by Different Fight where he explained an example that he uses, as well as the links in the description down to more information by the Bushiroad website itself. So again, prepare all the stuff that you're going to need to play your deck. Now, tip number 6 is going to be an extension of number 7, as that is have foods and drinks on hand. The reason why you want to have this is because the tournament will take up a couple of hours, and if you factor in top 8 as well, there's going to be even longer. Now granted, between the Swiss rounds and top 8 there will be a break where you can just dedicate for something to get some food or go to the bathroom or something else. There will be some time that you can do that. But during the Swiss rounds, this is going to be a little bit tricky. Yes, if you finish a round quickly, you can maybe grab a bite or something or go to the bathroom if you need it, because you have some extra time. But you should minimize the chance of doing this, because there is the likely chance that you're going to miss the next round and then automatically lose that round, because if you do not appear within 5 minutes before the next round is called, you will automatically lose that fight. And for anybody that went to regional, you could easily go to the bathroom or get something to eat between rounds, because they announce the next round via an intercom system, or they just yell through the room. You will hear it, and you also see everybody suddenly move. You will get visual and audio cues. But in a remote fight setting, this is going to be very tough, because the moment you step away from your computer, you're going in blind, because you're not going to hear the messages, you're not going to read the messages, because they're all on Discord. So to minimize the chance of you accidentally missing a round is to either prepare as many foods and drinks during the fight next to you, so you don't have to go away from your computer, or if you need to go away from your computer for maybe an emergency or something, try to minimize that time to about 2 to 3 minutes, because if it so happens that the moment you step away from the computer and the next round is called, you will be back in time to still participate for that round. Now, tip number 5 is going to be very specific to a remote fight setting, and that is to lay down your cards. I know we TCG players have some type of tick where we need to hand shuffle every single second, and I get it. It's for maybe to calm your nerves or something like that, or it's just in your nature to do this. But keep in mind, within the rules of the remote fight setting, you need to have your hand cards on screen at all times. If you accidentally move those cards out of the screen, you could get a warning, and if it happens twice, you could automatically be disqualified. And the longer you have these cards in your hand while you're moving or doing something, the bigger the chance is that you accidentally move them out of the screen. A good example is that maybe somebody is in the room where you're playing and you're just hand shuffling and they suddenly tell you something, or they do something that you're getting distracted, and you turn around while you have these cards in your hand. In a normal setting where we're in real life, when we're face to face, this doesn't really matter because I can still see those cards in your hand and nothing weird's happened. But if they move out of the view of the camera, total different story. So the less time you have these cards in your hand, the less chance there is that something weird happens that could accidentally disqualify you for the game or even for the tournament. So if you don't need to read the cards and you don't need to use them, my biggest advice is lay those cards down on the table in view of the camera. Now, tip number 4 is another tip around your cards, and that is to use non-singular color sleeves. What I mean with this is basically use sleeves like this, where there is an image or maybe a pattern which makes these sleeves very visible, so you can identify the singular cards. Because if you use sleeves like this, where there's just one color, it's going to be very hard to distinguish multiple cards if they stack on top of each other within your damage zone, maybe on the field. If you put your hand cards on the field face down, it's going to be hard to distinguish them for your opponent and maybe even the judge. And yes, you might think to yourself this could be actually beneficial because your opponent might not always know how much damage you have, but keep in mind, they're probably going to ask you multiple times what's the numbers, or the judge might need to clarify this. Also, if your fight is going to be featured on the cast table, it's also nice for the casters to know this more easily, what's happening. And because your opponent can easily notice how many cards are somewhere, they probably don't have to ask you multiple times the numbers, the value, and that will then make the game go faster and less likely to go into time, which can also backfire against you. So my advice is try to use non-singular color sleeves, as that will at least minimize the unnecessary questions and potential confusion. Because it might also backfire on you and you might slightly miscalculate the amount of cards that are on the table in a specific zone. Now, talking about the miscommunication and errors, for tip number 3, I got a very important one, and that is communicate. Communicate every single thing you're doing with your opponent that is necessary. Like, you don't have to explain the most bare basic if you're gonna call a unit. Maybe explain which unit you're going to call and what skills you're resolving, because it's going to be hard to follow everything as we're in a digital setting. When you're face to face with your opponent and you can see the physical cards, it's a lot easier to just track everything and see what's going on. But because we're now fighting through a screen and some players might not have the best quality of webcam, it can be hard to distinguish what card is where and what's actually happening on the screen. So to make everything go as smoothly as possible, try to communicate every single move you're doing while you're doing it, so your opponent as well as the judges and potentially even the casters can follow along what's going to happen without them interrupting you every single time you're doing something. Because keep in mind, if your opponent keeps interrupting you during your combos or your plays, you might make an accidental mistake because you're getting interrupted from your flow. And the more you communicate to your opponent, the less reasons they have to interrupt you, because they understand what's happening as you're explaining it while it's happening. So communicate, communicate, communicate. Now for tip number 2, we've got another way to improve the flow of the game, and that is to have a phone or a web browser open during the fight to consult potential card information. Now, even though I advise to communicate everything with your opponent, and thus your opponent hopefully communicates everything with you, there might be a situation where you personally much rather want to read the cards for yourself to have a better understanding, to understand what's happening and how these cards work. Because for some people, getting the information told to you might not always stick, and then reading the information actually works better for you. So for that, I would advise to have a phone or a web browser at the ready when you need to look up a card to see what it actually does. But while you do this, keep track of the game so you don't miss out on what's happening and you suddenly get confused. Do this while they're still thinking about a certain play, or you just attacked and they're thinking about guarding, so that you minimize the downtime of the fight and you don't go into overtime, and thus making more use of the game time itself. But if your opponent is doing a play with a specific card and you don't understand it, and they read the card to you but you still don't understand it, once again we go back to tip number 3. Communicate with your opponent that you're now looking up the card to understand it better for yourself. Because if you're going to look up the card because you don't understand what your opponent is doing and they cannot explain it well to you, and you start looking them up and they continue to do their plays, it gets whole messy and you're completely out of what's happening, and that could be a recipe for disaster. So if you're going to look up a card while your opponent is still doing plays, tell them that you don't understand what's happening, and then that you're about to look up the card to try to figure out what's going on and if it's possible, and if they're not doing something that you think might be an illegal move. Now there's one more tip that I want to give to you guys, and it's probably the most important tip and the tip to rule them all for Bushiroad Springfest Online, and that's to have fun. At the end of the day, we're playing Vanguard to just have fun, and Bushiroad Springfest Online is one of those ways to enjoy Vanguard and just to have fun while playing this game. Now there will be people out there that are going to enter this tournament to win the game, and that's completely fine because for them that's probably their way to have fun. But if you don't have that mindset, no worry, you can just enjoy the game and have fun while playing it, because that's the way that Vanguard was intended to be. So use these tips and tricks to prepare as well as perform to the best potential during this tournament, and to minimize the amount of confusion and mishaps. But as tip number 1 said it, whatever you do, have fun. But with that said, I hope you're gonna enjoy Bushiroad Springfest Online, be it with Vanguard Overdress, Vanguard V Premium, and maybe even with Buddy Fight. Let me know in the comments down below which tournament you signed up for the upcoming Bushiroad Springfest Online tournament, be it Overdress, V Premium, or maybe even Buddy Fight. Let me know which one you're the most excited for, and if you're gonna use one of these tips and tricks to prepare and perform to the best potential. But further than that, I've been Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one!